Ko Claire Rai Tokuunga. So good afternoon, my name is Claire Rai. I'm the Product Manager for Data Services at NeSI, which is the New Zealand eScience infrastructure. And I wanted to, well, I'm not quite going to talk about automation, but I'm sort of going to talk more about sort of the vision for Aotearoa, or Moemoea Nui Aotearoa. But actually, I first want to start with a bit of a story and a bit of a context for me. So this is Matariki. It's a star cluster which is visible in the night sky in Aotearoa at certain times of the year. And when its sort of reappearance in June signals the start of the Maori New Year. And some iwi kind of refer to it. It's not a particularly visible, I guess, cluster, but the mother and her daughters. And this seemed quite fitting because I recently spent 2 weeks in the isolation facility in New Zealand with 2 small children. It's not something I'd recommend, but we did a lot of reading to pass the time, and particularly this book, The Stolen Stars of Matariki. And we looked out every night for the constellation. We never saw it. We kind of discussed with the kids whether as in the story, the Patupairihi, the kind of cheeky elves, had stolen the star cluster in actual real life, as kind of my 4-year-old would say. So this was my introduction to Matariki, and I'm kind of very embarrassed to say that it took most of my adult life to work out something that's so culturally significant to the place that I grew up. So this really precipitated kind of a journey for me, and it's a journey that Aotearoa is very much already on. For the first time this year, Matariki will be celebrated as a public holiday in June. And this has kind of precipitated some really powerful commentary from Maori people, but also just sort of as a nation about what this means, what this means for the country, what this means for the Maori people. So this was a quote from one of our professors in Indigenous Studies and Maori Astronomy, and he's really calling for Mātarangi Maori, which is the traditional knowledge systems of New Zealand, to be kind of level pegged with kind of what we consider Western science, and not sort of put in the category of myths and legends as it's kind of often been dismissed as. So I think this is really kind of calling out kind of where the future is going in New Zealand, and the government is sort of already in consultation with the scientific community. So there's Te Ara Parangi, which is kind of this back and forth consultation, and it has 6 key themes, which kind of include the things you'd expect: aligning priorities, how the funding structures are going to work, more collaboration between institutes, how we train and retain our workforce. I'm looking at the expat Kiwi at the back there. But it also calls out kind of for the first time te tiriti, and really bringing Mātauranga Māori kind of on an equal footing with Western science. So that's kind of setting the scene for New Zealand. How do I fit into this? How does NeSI fit into this? We kind of design, build and operate the HPC facilities for New Zealand, which any kind of researcher in New Zealand has access to. The sort of 1-minute overview is that we support a huge amount of disciplines, including astronomy. We do a lot of consultancy, we do a lot of training, and we manage the National Data Transfer Platform, which is, of course, is based on Globus. So a few of our numbers. We have a total of 6 endpoints. We've got 2 more in progress, and as you can see, we are very, very proud of our slightly small but increasing data transfer flows. We had about 800 terabytes last year transferred, and I see after Ian's slides yesterday that I need to update mine. So obviously, as a perspective, Globus transfers more than more than a petabyte a day, and we're still annual transfer is less than the daily global transfer, and we have similar crazy comparisons with somewhere like CERN. So what does that kind of really mean for us? And I was debating what I should talk about today, because in reality, our sort of new and exciting infrastructure and what we're building and kind of and we're trying to integrate instrument workflows with Globus and so on. But to this audience, you're already doing that. So I wanted to be a bit deliberate in what I talked about, where kind of we can contribute in a different way. So I really wanted to talk today about Maori data sovereignty and kind of the impact that has on kind of data lifecycle management and sort of storage and sharing. So I want to use the Aotearoa Genomic Data Repository as kind of a case study. This is a repository for taonga species. Taonga means precious or treasured. So it's a lot of the species in and around New Zealand. So this project was to be co-designed with Maori. Now, what does that actually mean? I've got kind of a typical definition up here to kind of involve stakeholders and users in the design process. This is nothing new. I think what I've added in bold is that really this was more than just co-design. It was a kind of a genuine effort to take on board the ideas and perspectives of these users and stakeholders. So this was very much not a box ticking exercise. It was very much a genuine collaboration and an attempt to understand really a different worldview. So why is this important? I guess most fundamentally, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes the right thing to do is not enough of a motivation. So there's a few other reasons, and just to highlight the Te Tiriti obligation, so the founding document of New Zealand kind of outlines a lot of these rights. But also it allows and enables culturally appropriate genomic studies and really allows direct benefit for Maori from genomics. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention kind of there is, and I guess this is a case for a lot of Indigenous people, kind of a history of exploitation and misuse of samples, misuse of data. And so this is hopefully a path forward to move, positively on from that. So what was the situation when we started this? Essentially, there was no repository for genomic data in New Zealand. So researchers would either keep the data in their own host institution, sort of locked up and forgotten, or sometimes if they were tech savvy, it would go on a website somewhere, or we put in an overseas repository. So both NA and GenBank have plenty of sequences related to New Zealand data. So this obviously is not good from a perspective of FAIR, the classic findable and accessible. We don't know where it is, we don't know how to get a hold of it. It's certainly not interoperable or reusable. It also has another issue in that there's no kind of data governance over it. So here, anyone who comes across that sequence can essentially do what they like with it without any consultation or approval or kind of communication with the people who produce that data or kind of that data belongs to. So we needed to kind of address each of these issues, and rather than it just sort of being a list of requirements, we really tried to engage in a different mindset to take this on. So what did co-design look like for us? We had kind of a series of workshops. We'd have kind of weekly reviews with a working group, and we also used a couple of ethical frameworks. So Te Mata Ira, which is kind of based on a 3-year study that Maui Hudson led, and is really a series of guidelines for working with Maori with relation to genomic data. And I think it's very easy to sort of take a typical definition and kind of take my own perspective and my own history as, as a Pākehā person, as someone who's of European descent, and sort of take this and look at this definition and say, oh, the data just needs to be locked up. But that's not at all what it means. And so it's really key to understand the concept of whakapapa, which is often considered sort of a framework that describes the genealogy, the social and ecological relationships, the cultural history, family traits and ancestral inheritances. And so really at both a physical and spiritual level, whakapapa is embodied within the DNA. And so therefore kind of the storage and use of human tissue is very much a culturally significant activity. So what does this, we sort of, I guess, took that as context and took that as a guide when we were designing AGDR. So this is now in production, you can visit. We've got 14 projects at the moment with another 6 being submitted at the moment. And it's kind of typical of most repositories. You can search and browse the data and see what projects might be relevant for you, and then apply for access. Unlike, I don't know if you've ever applied to access for either EGA or DB gap. It's a very long and bureaucratic process. So we were able to kind of take a slightly different approach. And really this is because the Maori people have a concept of kaitiakitanga, which is kind of a form of guardianship. And so really there's people who are designated to be responsible for a specific resource, in this case, the genomic data. And so our process is very lightweight, and it's really just about ensuring, rather than sort of all the legal paperwork aspect, it's more about ensuring that there's communication and trust between the kaitiaki, the group who are responsible for the resource, and the researchers themselves, and that really there's alignment between the research goals. So once you've got access, or once you've been approved, how do you get access? Here comes Globus. And so essentially users can download or transfer the files that they've been granted access to. So far we've had 12 data access requests, 7 have been approved, 4 were rejected because kind of the researchers didn't want to state their intentions for the use of their data, which is sort of very much not in the spirit of the repository, and 1's in progress. So just to sort of briefly talk about next steps, we haven't really yet opened this up to wider submissions, so that's obviously kind of a next step, and then sort of iterative improvement based on feedback. We're also working on the Aotearoa project, which is a genomic pathfinder sort of in genomic health. So we're looking to apply a lot of this learning and this kind of structure, I guess, in a human context going forward. And finally, I just wanted to thank the AGDR team. I joined this project sort of halfway through, so these are the people who've done most of the work. And finally to the NeSI team and the audience. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. Should we just look it up? There we go.
Question for you about the authorization system. Are the people who make the decisions about data access requests, whether they're approved or rejected, the same people who have custodianship of the data, or are those different groups and they need to coordinate somehow with each other?
Yeah, so great question. So it's a coordination at this point. We have different groups of kaitaki who kind of have guardianship over different data sets, as it were. And so, yeah, we're sort of the central coordination for the actual authorization. Yeah.
Other questions? Other questions in the room? Online? Bridget, anything? Okay, thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.